We are going to unpack this further with a splendid panel discussing how we can protect our democracy, how we can leave the light on, basically, don't we? So we have Henry Farrell, professor at the Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies. We have Ivan Krastev, chairman of the Center for Liberal Strategies. We have Nathalie Loiseau, a member of the European Parliament and chair of the Special Committee on the European Democracy Shield. And my name is Caroline de Gruyter, and I'm a Dutch journalist writing for NRC and Foreign Policy on European affairs from Brussels. Tech was, for a long time, well, a technical issue. But now it's become a political issue. I've just read the latest book by Giuliano da Empoli, who used to be a political spin doctor for one of the prime ministers in Italy. The book, I'm not sure it's out in English, but in French it's called L'heure des prédateurs, so the hour of the predators. And he says, in the 20th century, the big divide was between the state and the market. So between the public interest and the private interest, and the balance between the two. In the 21st century, the divide, he says, is between humans and machines. In his book, he writes the story of a small French village just south of Paris called Lieu Saint, the holy place, where all of a sudden a village with like 14,000 people, very sleepy, and all of a sudden they had, hundreds of trucks per hour racing through the village, and then soon thousands of trucks. And it turned out that this happened because of Waze. The GPS kind of, I don't even know how you call it. So if the traffic was stuck, Waze would direct car drivers from the highway through this tiny little village. There were accidents, there were traffic jams there. It was one nightmare. And Empoli goes and talks to the mayor of the village, who tried everything in the village council, tried everything to change the situation democratically, local democracy. Nothing worked. He invited people from Waze who were nice enough to come over, but you're talking algorithms. There was nothing democracy could do anymore. It's quite a bleak story. So, are we fighting on many levels for the future of democracy? How well equipped are we? Which tools do we have, and which new ones do we need to develop? So let me start with Henry Farrell. How much is our democracy under threat from tech? What are we talking about?
So quite a lot. And I think the way that I would frame what you said is, in one sentence, algorithms scale and democracy does not. So if you look at the way that, for example, social media companies work, they have maybe tens of thousands of employees for services which may serve billions of people. And so this is one of the reasons that they have, of course, always wanted to wriggle out from under the mandate to have to prevent hate speech, to have to prevent this or that other thing, because it's really, really hard to do this at scale, except with algorithms which don't work particularly well. So if I want to think about what a big problem is, I think that we are seeing more and more resort to trying to use algorithms, sometimes to get around the democratic process, so that if you look in the United States at the moment, there's been a big, big push to try to reshape immigration so that it is run by, by services provided by companies such as Palantir, which can, at much greater scale, can provide information about who, for example, are immigrants who need to be deported by the Trump administration. If you try to do that and try to run it well, you are not going to be capable of providing civil rights to the many people whose lives are perhaps going to be completely destroyed by these decisions. And so you want to try to run everything by algorithm. So I think that one of the big challenges we have is trying to figure out, in a world where there are all of these pressures to do things via algorithm, both for reasons of efficiency, they do work quite well for some processes, and also to evade accountability, or to claim that the accountability only happens through the algorithm, where it sees how people respond and then it responds purportedly much better than democracy. How can you actually create new opportunities for democratic voice to intervene in systems which are designed effectively to work at such a scale that individual human efforts to try and interfere with this, or to change this, or to voice complaints simply do not compute, simply do not fit into the system?
Okay. Let me move to Nathalie now. If it really sounds like it's humans versus the machines, it's very difficult for humans to still interfere. What are the tools that we have in Europe?
Well, it's maybe even worse than humans versus the machine, because when humans want the machine to attack democracies, we are in a serious situation. And this is what is happening now. For years, foreign powers like Russia or China have used social media for pushing their interferences, their information manipulation. And they were able to do so, and willing to do so. But platforms were saying that they were neutral to it, but not anymore. First, you have TikTok, which basically bans everything that doesn't please the Chinese Communist Party, and hypes everything that pleases some extremes. We've seen it in Romania, we've seen it in Poland, and we are going to see it again and again during electoral processes. And now you have Elon Musk on X. Not only, as we saw previously, Elon Musk intervene in the German political campaign, strongly supporting AfD, and we'll still need to find out whether the algorithm was manipulated in order to provide more visibility to one political party compared to the others in this electoral process in Germany. But very recently, because Elon Musk's AI, Grok, was not providing the good answers to questions from internauts about where was political violence coming from in the US. And repeatedly, Grok had answered that it was coming from far-right racist movements. And it wouldn't please Elon Musk. He promised to fix the AI. And no later than this morning, he posted on X that he had fixed it. So now the answers would fit his own political opinion. So it's not even machine versus man, but men using machines to harm democracies. And this is where we are. We do have already some instruments in the European Union. This is why they are under attack. We have the Digital Services Act, we have the AI Act, we have the Transparency and Targeting of Political Advertising Directive. All of these are highly criticized by tech companies, which used to portray themselves as, I would say, libertarian, but now it's more tech authoritarianism that we are facing. And so far, well, we adopted these legislations because our voters asked us to do so. So it was an exercise of democracy. And we were re-elected on the promise that we would enforce these regulations. But so far, the European Commission seems to be terrified at the idea to use the weapon it has in its own hands because of political pressure from the Trump administration. And let me just mention one more reason to be concerned. I mentioned TikTok and the Chinese Communist Party. I mentioned X and other American tech companies. We know that, for instance, Meta didn't ban Russia Today or Sputnik for some years until it did. So didn't comply with EU and American sanctions. But let's talk about Telegram, which is obviously offering backdoors to Russian intelligence services, which does not comply with EU regulations because they pretend they have less users than what every single research institute can try to check. So they are under the radar, and they are the most active platforms in terms of criminal activities. So yes, we have to walk the talk, and protecting democracy it starts by implementing and enforcing the decisions that we have democratically taken.
So what you're saying basically is we have a lot of tools, but we're not using them fully.
Out of intimidation from Washington.
Can you sketch out some of the intimidation?
Well, I was in the room when J.D. Vance in Munich lectured us about what our democracies should be, how they should look like. And I remember what he had said during the campaign and afterwards, that American troops might be withdrawn from Europe if we were not getting soft on digital regulations. And we all witnessed that the NATO summit ended up in a sort of damage control atmosphere, but did not address the presence of American troops in Europe, which is left to later conversations.
Okay. Ivan, remember Anu Bradford's, I think she was here last year or 2 years ago, talking about her book, Digital Empires, saying Europe is the world's regulator. The Chinese are regulating to protect the state. The Americans are regulating, or were at the time, to protect companies. The only one who's regulating to protect citizens is Europe. Is Europe still, or can Europe still be the world's regulator?
No. I'm a stranger to the conversation. I'm not a specialist on technology, and I do believe this was the reason I was invited, because on every panel there should be somebody who is not very much in the conversation in order to make it open to the others. No, this is not a joke. I'm saying this because, in my view, we're slightly wrongly. There is a big problem, but I'm not sure that we're framing rightly. The first is Europe had an idea, which was, by the way, absolutely legitimate idea back then, that because we do not have companies like Alibaba or Google and others, we are going to be in a better position to regulate, but it was assumed on the idea that they're going to be a common market. This is not there. Whom we are going to regulate? The Chinese technological sphere or the American technological sphere? So this is from yesterday. I don't believe that it was necessarily a wrong bet, but it was a wrong bet on the world which does not exist anymore. So from this point of view, the major change is also that the United States changed its position, and as a result of it, you have a kind of a much more strong security dimension. You can regulate, they can stop providing you the service. We do not have technological companies that can substitute the Americans or the Chinese, and this is the story. And then when it comes to democracy, I also do believe that we're slightly putting it in a wrong way. In the end of the 19th century, Walter Bagehot said that monarchy is the best form of government because most of the people in the world cannot imagine any another one. And he basically...
Say it again, because the rest of the world?
Cannot imagine a really different form of government. So the major story is people quite often run on the weakness of their political imagination. And the story about technology is we are going to have a different type of democracies. Just defending democracies in the way they are, believing that we can stop the influence of the technological companies and others, it's not going to work because we are changed by these technologies, even when the Russians or Chinese are not there. For example, it is changing the cost of starting a new political party. It is changing the relations between the leader of the political party and the voters. You don't need the Lenin's type of a party in order to run themselves. And all this is happening everywhere, and you cannot regulate this. By the way, the major story that you see in the way the young people vote, the old people vote, this is simply because the idea of the political participation is different. You can see how much the technology is changing other things. For example, the way we are dating, the way we are shopping. To believe that everything is going to change, but only our political behavior is going to remain in the way it was, I find this unrealistic. So from this point of view is try also to see how the democratic institution should adjust to reality. Because we are moving from one extreme to the other. I'm old enough to remember 2018 when we're calling all these technologies the liberation technologies. Do you remember that all the revolutions at certain period used to have as a names the company names? You have a Twitter revolution. Do you remember how important Telegraph was for the Iranians' protests? So from this point of view, I very much agree that with people who know what they're speaking about, technologies are not neutral. They have biases, and these biases at some point was much more, let's put it, pro-liberal, pro-Western, and now because of the changes in the way the companies see the world, in the way the United States see the world, some of these biases go in another direction. But from this point of view, I do believe we should try to ask the bigger question. How people are going to change, what their understanding, for example, of being democratic decision-making. What people in this village are going to do about the trucks. And one of the problems of this is the change of speed, and I'm going to end up on this. Listen, what has dramatically changed is the change of speed. Decisions are taking very fast. And all these things are going to change our institutions. For example, we talk a lot about nuclear. Believe me, the moment when you have a nuclear weapon, the parliamentary regimes are going to be dramatically changed. Because you can like or dislike Carl Schmitt, but there is one decision which decides who is the sovereign, and this is who is going to use it, has the power to use a nuclear weapon in an extreme situation, and this is not going to come as a result of a parliamentary commission taking certain decisions, and it's not by accident that all countries that have nuclear weapons has a very strong executive. I do believe all these institutional changes, because nuclear, technology, and so on, are changing the way the decisions are making. So for me, the question is how we can protect the rights of the people and the sense of freedom in a society that is already dramatically changed. By the way, before a country like Bulgaria was very much protected by the fact that we have a small language. So if you want to influence Bulgarian population, you should learn Bulgarian. And this is not an exercise that is particularly inspiring, even for many intelligence agencies. And when they're learning Bulgarian, they're learning it badly. So you always can understand basically that people who is trying to talk to you is a foreigner. Not a problem anymore. Not a problem anymore. So, but listen, these kind of things are fundamentally changing our understanding of politics. And I do believe European Union is totally right to do the things that they're doing. It's not going to be enough. Even if we're going to keep some of these regulations, and believe me, it's not going to be easy, because, for example, now Apple is saying, okay, you don't want to do it, we don't like your regulations, you're not going to have AI on the smartphones, basically, working in Europe. And this is going to have a business cost. This is going to have other things. So all this is creating a totally new problematic. And as I said, I don't have a single answer, because still I don't have social media. Till 5 years ago, I didn't have a phone. So I'm the last person to talk about this topic, but probably we should come with a much more radical frame to understand what is ahead of us in the next 10 years. Otherwise, we can become the victim of the weakness of our political imagination.
Okay, that was a volley. So what is ahead of us, Henry? What do you think is ahead of us? Should we throw all our rules out of the window and try to, full speed design new ones? What is ahead of it?
Okay, so it's really hard to say what is ahead of us. I think that some things that people think are ahead of us probably are not. So if when I'm hearing what Ivan is saying, I'm thinking a lot about the arguments that people make about AI, and in particular that AI is going to lead to AGI, or artificial general intelligence, that sometime in the next few years we're going to see a world in which we have more or less super intelligence as a service. We have all of these disembodied geniuses in labs that are going to be able to design all of these things for us, and that this is going to fundamentally transform the human condition. And it isn't just the AI lab like OpenAI and Anthropic and Google's DeepMind that are saying this. This actually was the major reason why Jake Sullivan came up with the small yard, high fence argument that Nacho talked about in the previous session, was this notion that we were going to be going into a world in which AGI was going to give an insuperable advantage to whoever had control of it. Sullivan did not want to see a world where AGI had Chinese characteristics, and so he believed that if we used semiconductor controls to keep the United States ahead for just long enough that they could get to AGI, at that point the United States would develop an insuperable advantage. So I think the world we're going to head into, I don't think that the technology is going to get there for a variety of technical reasons. Instead, I think that we should think about these technologies, AI in particular, as being a cultural and social and political technology. That is, that it's going to transform the ways in which society works. It's going to transform the way in which culture, our ideas and our norms are reproduced and changed. And as Ivan said, it is going to reshape our politics. And I think it is going to be much weirder and murkier and messier than anybody expects. And here I think I'm absolutely in agreement with you. This is going to be a really hard process to control or to anticipate. The EU does like to adopt a precautionary principle type approach to new technologies, which I think is much better by and large than the US approach, which is more or less shrug your shoulders and deal with it years after the fact. But I also think that we are in a world where all of these policy-making apparatuses are going to have to get much more used to quick feedback from unexpected changes in the world than they have been in the past. And I think that the EU in particular is going to have a very difficult time with this. The whole process of sort of get the Commission to come up with a draft for a directive or whatever, have this going through Parliament over a period of several years. This really is not going to be well fitted for the world that we're in. And so I do think that sort of worlds of having trialogues and all of these sort of other wonderful institutions, they're going to have to be radically reformed for a world in which change is going to happen much more quickly and much more unexpectedly than we think, and in which we really are going to have to adapt institutions rapidly to these quite unexpected demands that are likely to pop up.
Okay, Natalie, the field is yours.
Just a few comments. The first one about tech companies saying, well, if you keep on with your rules, we'll go elsewhere. Okay, if they are ready to lose the market of 450 million users, let's them give it a try. I'm not so certain. They hope that we change our regulations. At the moment we keep them, they adapt to them. And more than that, there is still a Brussels effect on GDPR, for instance. I remember because they lobbied so hard against GDPR, and the moment we adopted it and we implemented it, they basically said to other countries, please use the same kind of regulation, because at least there's only one kind of regulation we have to adapt to.
Because it's the most...
It became the standard.
It's the strictest, and it's the best enforced, and it has a big market behind it.
And it has a big market.
So Google and Microsoft, even in America, they follow European data protection rules.
And a neighbor like the UK, despite Brexit, well, they don't say it in the open for obvious reasons, but I was there a month ago, legislators and people from the government are telling us, well, on DSA, on AI, don't say it too loud, but we are struggling to have as comparable a legislation as yours. Because for companies, it's easier to have comparable legislations, not to call them alignment to EU standards, but some sort. And you're right on the speed of technology, the speed of changes doesn't fit with the rhythm of the EU, and I get mad at the rhythm of the EU daily. But on tech regulation, who lobbied heavily to make us as slow as possible? Tech companies. Because they would say, okay, DSA, you adopt it, but you give us time to adapt. So I'm sure that citizens get lost. They don't even realize that we adopted it years ago and that we gave such a delay for companies to adapt to them. And in between, Trump administration came in and said, well, the conversation is not about how our companies are going to adapt to DSA, it's how you are going to adapt DSA to our companies. And it's true for AI, it's true for political advertising. None of our legislations is being implemented on the day it's adopted. And it's because of the lobbying of businesses. So yes, we can be faster. On AI, I'm not saying that our legislation is going to last forever or even for a decade. And we were cautious to adapt it to different levels of risks. To say, okay, non-risky activities with AI, okay, go ahead. We are not going to regulate you that much. But high-risk activities, yes, there are a number of things that you have to do. And AI and democracy, well, you all know about deepfakes, or you think you know, because we already saw some examples of deepfakes changing election results, like in Slovakia, where the party which was heading in the polls and heavily heading in the polls faced a deepfake just before the election day and lost at the last minute to the party of Robert Fico. So it has consequences. We have to stand firm. Of course, we have to be agile and adapt to new technologies, new usages. For instance, we have to have open eyes on how cryptocurrencies are being the financial means to pay for foreign interferences and for political parties, because it's brand new and it changes the rules on many things. But our citizens are not telling us, give it away.
No, definitely
not at all.
No.
They are saying, we made our choices and we want to see our choices implemented. And we have to realize that this so-called conversation on freedom of speech versus censorship is hiding much bleaker issues. We are trying to regulate child sexual abuses online. Businesses are fighting against it. Against regulation. The same way as some years ago we were trying to ban terrorist contents online. Businesses were telling us it was not possible. Well, we stood firm because we were certain it was possible to withdraw terrorist content in an hour. And finally, it's not that it was not possible, it's just that it had a cost. But what sort of cost does it have for our society to have terrorist contents online, to have child sex abuse online? We cannot agree that tech company leaders not being elected, private companies are designing rules which apply to common good.
Okay, so the Empoli is wrong. Actually, it's still the public versus the market, and the market is winning. Can I push you a little bit more on? You say you have no solutions, but I'm sure you're thinking of them. If our regulation is not up to speed, up to target even, what else is it that we can do, you think?
One of the good news is that because of all these things happening, every crisis is also changing the way people view what the technologies are doing. One of the best books that I have been doing, what you're doing, I have read of how you respond to the fake news was basically asking people to make a fake news themselves. Because the moment you understand how easy it is, you're starting to see basically the information differently. And this is particularly true for the deep fake, which is going to be what we're going to see. So from this point of view, it's not that the people are also the same users of technologies that they have been yesterday. But what I'm afraid is the following. Before, by the way, the MAGA people, they came to power, and one of their major target in the beginning was the big tech companies. Because basically MAGA believed that technology companies were totally on the Biden side and were going after them. So if you're going to see, so from this point of view, one of the interesting stories about technology is that everybody believes that they're victim of technology. The same with the fake news. I never believed that any of my friends ever believe that he's the victim of fake news. Normally, we claim that the victim of fake news are people who do not think like us, and we cannot understand how they cannot see the obvious. I do believe that there are major political divides in our society, and the biggest story is polarization. Now you're trying to use technology to solve the political problem that many does not think like you. And this is exactly the story of American talk about we're for the freedom of speech, and then you go and ask students to show their social media. This should be made, this is not high technology, this is a common sense. Either you believe that people can say what they want to say, and then basically you cannot check.
Do we need to work on education?
But this is
civic education.
But civic education is great. The problem is that people now are educated through much more different channels than simply the school. And one of the biggest problems that at least I see in the countries that I know better is that part of this major uneasiness and anxiety comes from the fact that the parents don't believe anymore that they know how to educate their children. They want the states to do this. They try to see smartphones as the source of everything that is changing, and they cannot understand anymore. So we're talking about a major social change, not only political. By the way, political is going to be incredible. It's in 5 years, those of you who are going to go on elections, you're going to see what AI does, because the cost is going to be very low. And as a result of it, these are things that we are not going to prevent. And even you can cut for 2 weeks before the elections. Social media, by the way, it's not going to be very popular with the voters, believe me. But then this is going to create another conspiracy theories and others. So we're going to live in a world which is going to be very much fragmented. Because what the market does is, and this is different to the state, state try to create a social cohesion. Any state, by the way. Democratic, authoritarian state, they want to create a common space and basically social cohesion. Market works by fragmenting because you're creating different niches and others. So this is a different principle of governing society. How to govern society which is very much fragmented. How to be sure that different parts of the fragments has equal rights. This is a new type of question. So on this type of kind of questions, I don't have an answer because the answer is not simply a policy answer. I don't believe that we should not try to regulate. There are certain things that can be achieved through regulations. To believe that it is enough, our regulations to be implemented and that all problems are going to disappear, or that current American government is simply going to watch how we're doing this, if they see them as their allies, I'm slightly more skeptical. So there is a Brussels effect. There is also Trump effect. And let's see which of them are going to be stronger when it comes to technology.
Yeah, okay. What are your thoughts about this?
Okay, so I'm a little bit in between, which is to say that on the Brussels effect, I think the Brussels effect is toast. I don't think that it works very well anymore, because if you look at privacy, the reason that the Brussels effect worked very well was that the United States did not have an alternative to offer. It did not want to regulate privacy in the private sector, and so this meant that it was effectively the United States with nothing to offer, trying to say that this nothing was better than regulation, and that argument did not particularly work. So I think the Brussels effect works very well in a world where we have a relatively unified market, where there is a need for rules for everybody to coordinate upon. And the European Commission is extremely good at slowly, patiently, carefully crafting and tweaking those rules in such a way as to take advantage of a unified, globalized world. And this is a different version of Ivan's point. We're in a fragmented world now, and I think it's going to be much, much harder for Europe to use its traditional approaches. And here I think this is where the Eurostack conversation really comes in, that I think, Sven, this is where I absolutely agree with you on the Digital Services Act. I think Europe has a fundamental problem, which is EACO. Europe always chickens out. When it comes to these kinds of things, Europe, it has great difficulty in mounting a unified perspective. It is very easy for opponents to try to pick things off. And I think when the European Commission sees the Digital Services Act as being a set of possible concessions to offer in a trade deal, this is a fundamental mistake, a very basic mistake that it is making about the nature of the situation that Europe is in at the moment. And so if you look at there was a Department of State official Substack talking about the need for civilizational allies in Europe, which expresses their argument, where it says more or less that Europe is all about trampling democracy and Western heritage along with it in the name of a decadent governance class which is afraid of its own people. Look around. Here is the decadent governance class and this is the reason they want to get rid of the Digital Services Act. They've got a theory of what Europe ought to be, and Europe fundamentally needs to be a far-right populist set of institutions if it is to work. Final question. I do think that we don't want to talk about the market versus politics. I completely agree with Ivan on the point about fragmentation, but this is something which is not necessarily being produced by market mechanisms. This is being produced by a new form of politics. So I think the
political choices.
Yeah, but and fundamentally here, I think the way that I think about it is, we talk a lot about what the public is. We cannot see what the public is. The public is too vast, too complicated, too amorphous to actually have a shape. So we have various technologies which we use to try to reduce it down, such as surveys and opinion polls, which tells that 45% of people want this and 30% of people want that, and so on. We have been dealing with, over the last decade, a new technology that, quote, reveals various forms of the public, which are more or less distorted to itself, which is social media. And we're about to be hit by large language model type technologies such as GPT, which are a whole different kettle of fish. So when I worry about them, I'm less worried about the generation of deepfakes than the possibility of having automated persuasion at scale. There is some very interesting research coming out, which suggests, on the one hand, if you want to look at the positive side of it, you can use these technologies to persuade people out of conspiracy theories. So you just get them to talk to the large language model, and if it has not been tweaked too much in bad ways, it is going to tell them all of the reasons, and it is going to be an endlessly patient interlocutor with them. On the other hand, there is research which has not been published yet, but which is floating around, which suggests suggest that you can use large language models in much the same way to persuade people to bad and to crazy ideas, generating very, very different kinds of publics than we have had in the past. And that, I think, is the real set of problems that we need to confront.
Wow, that's a lot of work for legislators as well. I think I will throw it open and see if there are any questions from the room. We have 10 minutes left, I think. Are there any questions? Yes, there are several questions. Can you introduce yourselves? And
Yes, Andrew Puddifat. I used to chair the Internet Watch Foundation, which is an organisation that searches and blocks child sex abuse online. Just wanted to correct something Natalie said. The big US corporations are not the major hosts of child sex abuse. The largest country and the largest number of countries that host sex abuse in the world is the Netherlands, unfortunately, Mabel, where about 5 or 6 sites hold the bulk of child sex abuse images, followed by Slovakia. So it's an EU problem. That material is being hosted here in Europe, and European countries are not dealing with it. It's not the American companies. Let's just get that right. And secondly, the DSA requires risk assessments by companies as part of its regulation. That's the core of its approach. When the companies submitted their risk assessments, no one in Europe came back to them in the first year to give them a comment on the risk assessments. So the companies have concluded that the EU doesn't know how to enforce its risk assessment process. And I think it needs to gear up its regulators to actually deal with the legislation. It's not just a resistance on behalf of the companies. There are failures on the European side that need to be addressed.
okay, one there.
Hi, my name is Casper, and I guess, Natalie, I work on the dark side. I work for a US technology company. One thing that I'm very concerned about these days is a little bit the transatlantic relationship, and I have a question to you on that, because I think what we've seen for good reasons on Danish, so we have had a thing with Greenland, so we understand the concerns about the US approach. But I think what we're also seeing is what I would call digital sovereignty on steroids in the last 4 months, where European leaders are incredibly concerned about US technology. The ICC case that was mentioned before is sort of a very good example on that. But it's actually pushing us a little bit into the hands of the Chinese. So in the bigger picture, what do we do to keep the light on, as Nacho said, to keep a transatlantic relationship so that we can stay together? I personally think the private sector will have to be the custodians of the transatlantic relationship right now, but what do we need to do?
Question there. I'll take 3 and then I let you answer them.
Thank you. Zanda Kalniņš, a member of Latvian Parliament. And I recently prepared for the Council of Europe a report on foreign interference that was adopted by the parliamentarians in April. And I fully share the analysis. And indeed, thank you, first of all, a great discussion and great panel. And I would like to come back to the question, what can we do? Because I think we share the concerns, we share the analysis, and then there are not so much to do on our to-do list, because it's more for the long term, so media literacy, critical thinking, education of the society, but the speed is incredible. So I would dare to pose a rather blunt question. So if we see who are the main meddlers in our democracies, so there are 3, Russia, China, and Iran. And recently, Canada indicated that also India is trying some of the techniques. So, and the 2 most dangerous platforms are the China-based TikTok and Russia-linked Telegram. Those were also the ones used in Moldova, in Romania, and elsewhere. So, could we go back to the idea of banning TikTok in Europe? Or shouldn't we spare and lose any time and energy on that, and instead try to become good and better in using TikTok, for example, also for the good of democracy and communicating also our values and ideas?
Okay, 3 questions, a little bit over 5 minutes left. You've got 2 minutes each to answer the questions. You're going to donate 1 minute to the European Parliament. Okay, European Parliament, you start.
This fancy idea of banning TikTok. Look at Donald Trump, who said he would. And then he postpones the decision because he probably hopes there's going to be a deal and one of his friends is going to benefit from the deal. Because now what we are seeing in the US is more oligarchs in charge than anything else. I'm not sure banning TikTok is something that I would favor, first because I'm a liberal. I don't like to ban a media, because we are talking about media after all. These companies have resisted the idea that they were media, but they are media. So banning a media is not an option that I would favor. And if we ban TikTok, another one will come. So it's a race that we will not win at the end. But just saying, if you want to work on our market, if you want to make money on your market, you respect our rules. That's a very calm conversation that we have to have. I agree that sometimes the SA was not or is not properly implemented, neither by the European Commission or by member states. But to be honest, in terms of lobbying and pressure that we feel in the European Parliament, tech companies are Olympic champions. They are in our corridors day in, day out. And they really want us to try to say, okay, for the sake of good transatlantic relations, be nice and don't do what you said you would be doing. And imagine, I'm an elected politician. I would go back to my voters. I said, finally, the reasons why you elected me, you were wrong because I'm not following suit with my promises. Thank you, but it's not what I'm going to do because I still want to win the next election. Sorry for that. But how could we work better in a transatlantic manner? You're right to say that there is a little music right now saying Trump is so bad, and after all, Chinese are stable. And why wouldn't we turn to a stable China, stable and powerful? And obviously, private companies in the US have a role to reach out and not to get aligned with the Vance type of speech, which really doesn't fly well in Europe. And a number of them are doing it. Microsoft was present in the European Parliament recently and will be back, probably with this instinct that if we want to make sure that in Europe there is no pressure to drift away from the transatlantic relation and sort of consider that China is not that dangerous after all, we have to work with private companies to have a common understanding. But this common understanding cannot be that we forget about our priorities and our societal choices.
Because after all, we want to keep the light on, or some light on. What about companies as custodians of transatlantic relations?
It's possible. I think it's going to be tough. So here, so in response to two questions, I'm going to steal two ideas from science fiction writers. On the question of Atlantic cooperation, Cory Doctorow, who's a science fiction writer and tech writer, talks a lot about what he calls adversarial interoperability as a principle for how technology works. And he talks about things like the internet. So many of the internet's fundamental security protocols are based upon the idea that you cannot trust others. So you try to build around that. And I think if businesses do want to be what Microsoft used to call a digital Switzerland between these sort of clashing powers, it is going to have to figure out how to build adversarial interoperability into its fundamental protocols so that it makes itself fundamentally incapable of handing over data to state A, which has been demanded as from state B. This is something which we have seen has happened in the past, and I don't think that people are fundamentally going to trust in Europe US-based businesses unless they take some quite fundamental steps to make themselves fundamentally incapable of responding to certain kinds of attacks. And on the question of what do we do, big question, I think that there's a very nice, Rosanna Emrys, she's a science fiction writer, she has a book called A Half-Built Garden. It's a vision of the future. And one of the fundamental questions she asks in that is, What if we had social media which was designed not to take advantage of fundamental human cognitive biases, but then instead to try and correct for this? This is an interesting set of design problems which we do not see very much demand for take-up in the tech space at the moment. I would love to see a lot more, and I would love to see a lot of work being done by politicians to encourage that to happen.
Okay. Have you given away your 2-minute slot, or?
I have my 50 seconds. And the story is, in a democracy, the biggest fear always that somebody is going to control people's mind. And you're forgetting 1950s, how many people basically believed about the power of brainwashing and this and that. There is a natural process also of regulation, which means that people start to fear certain things and they try to react. But there is one major difference between the government and the market. Market is empowering you to do what you want. And what you want is to talk to people like you. So this fragmentation isn't important, not simply because the companies are pushing for this, but because this is our natural choices. How to mix people is a problem. Normally, state was doing this, but that does not feel very legitimate to do it anymore. Sorry.
Okay. That was right on target. We're 10 seconds slow. I want to thank the panel for a very fascinating discussion. Could have gone on for a long time.